and everything else is ancillary, right? So focus on getting your core missions right, and then you don't have to worry about your core missions. So, but K through 12, let's understand something here. For 25 years in Springfield, after the Illinois lottery was introduced to forever make our school funding woes go away, you know, how'd that work out? Here's been the debate in Springfield between Republicans and Democrats. Should we put this much more money into the system or this much more? And yet we have urban, particularly in urban areas, school systems, K through 12 systems that are abject failures. We've increased state spending on K through 12 in real terms in the last 20 years by 32%. And test scores are stagnant statewide. Graduation rates are actually declining. In Chicago, 400,000 kids, 50% will graduate. 6 of every 100 CPS freshmen in school today will get a BA by the time they're 25. 6 in 100 in a system of 400,000 kids. The graduation rate in Rockford, 40% high school graduation rate. So if you want to change this system, and that's what's required, or any system, you change how the money flows and you change who gets to make spending decisions. So what I've proposed is I will not fund centralized bureaucracies and finance teachers' unions. But what I will do is invest in families and empower them with choice by giving them the resources to choose their own adventure for their child. I'm the only candidate who's proposed a statewide opportunity scholarship program that would do precisely that. Take the state's contribution to a child's education and give that to the family so that the family could choose public, private, parochial, charter, and so forth, so that you infuse competition into a system that has really suffered atrophy because of the lack of competition.
Do you think that's feasible to pass? And the reason I bring this up is I actually find that very intriguing. You know, they shut down the DC one where it seems like a lot of people really enjoyed it and it really helped lift some people out of poverty and have the opportunity for an education. But I'll give you an example. In the local area here, not one of our local schools are passing the No Child Left Behind testing for this year. Not one. I'm lucky enough to be able to send my kids to private school, yet I put 3 children through a private school for less than it takes to put 1 child through the public school here. So you have this situation where, at least in these areas here, if people had the opportunity for a voucher, I think they would leave the public schools in droves, but that would create a lot of issues, would it not, for the infrastructure that's left behind?
Well, I mean, to some extent, maybe in the short term, but the idea, you know, I hear this argument back a lot. Well, what's going to happen? You might have some public schools that close. Yeah, and maybe they should. If people do not want to voluntarily send their children to a school, if they had another opportunity, what does that tell you about the performance of that school? What does that tell you about the concern level of those families? And they're probably right on point. So the difference, the one thing I would say though is you can't look at this statically, right? Competition, 1,000 flowers bloom. So once you attach resources to students and you introduce competition into a marketplace, you know, it is impossible for me or anybody else to predict the number and variety of schools that will spring up to compete for those students and those associated dollars. I mean, essentially the system that I'm talking about is precisely like a system that we have in place that I think pretty much everybody's heard of, called college. Right? Because at the collegiate level, your GI Bill, your Stafford loan, your Pell Grant, it's attached to me. I get to go wherever I want to go. Schools compete for me. We have some of the best colleges and universities in the world in Illinois, some of the worst K through 12 systems. What's the difference between the two systems? One operates under a competitive model largely, and the other does not. And the other thing I would say too is, you know, we have charter schools statewide now, but only about 2% of kids in K through 12 get access to a charter school. And everybody seems to laud charter schools. This has been a positive innovation. It passes Springfield with large majorities, the expansion of charter schools just this last term. So the question becomes to those folks and the grand protectors of the status quo, the teachers' unions, if you say by your own words that charter schools have been a positive innovation, that choice has been a positive innovation, if it's good enough for those 2% of the kids, then why isn't it good enough for the other 98%? And they don't have an answer to that question because the answer is obvious. In the Chicago public school system, 40% of Chicago public school teachers send their children to private schools. What do you think they know, right? So, I mean, I think we need to have a sense of urgency about this issue because if we do not get K through 12 right and set kids on a path to be successful, independent adults, then we open up a Pandora's box of all kinds of other social costs that we have indeed opened in this state because kids are not prepared to compete in our global digital economy.
So I guess I wanted to follow up one more time on that, because I mean, I don't disagree with you at all, but my always concern is I see that there's strong teachers unions, and there's also the type of, groups that believe that public funding shouldn't go to religious things. So for example, in a small town like this, we have Catholic schools and Lutheran schools as the alternative to public. There's no
Sure.
charter schools. And if someone ties their money and goes to a private school, does the federal government then get involved in saying, A, we can't give money to, religious organizations, or two, if we do give money, they can't teach religion in those schools?
No.
Which is, okay.
The Supreme Court's decision in 2003, the Zellman versus Simmons-Hardin decision, which was with respect to the Cleveland School Choice Program, made that clear, that is not a legitimate constitutional argument.
Okay, so if we implement
We're on
something
solid
like this,
constitutional
we feel we're on
ground.
solid. Excellent.
Yeah.
Just a few more questions. Real quick one, Second Amendment. Want to get your feedback and interpretation on the Second Amendment.
It's an individual right. I am a life member of the NRA. I support right to carry. I believe not only a right to carry, which I think illustrates my view more generally on the Second Amendment. I don't just support right to carry because I think it's consistent with our individual God-given Second Amendment rights. I also support it because it's good public policy. I like to go where the evidence leads. And we know from the evidence of the 48 states that have right to carry laws, starting with Florida more than 20 years ago now, that states with right to carry have seen their Class X felony rates decline precipitously faster than states with more restrictive gun laws like Illinois. So it's not just about upholding constitutional rights, it's also about making society safer, which are both public goods. And so the Second Amendment I see as, again, a negative restraint on government, which is what all the amendments in the Bill of Rights are intended to be, a negative restraint on government so that the individual can have the fullest expression of their personal liberties.
So you believe in concealed carry?
Yes.
Okay. What about, well, I know Chicago's going to go before the Supreme Court.
Right.
They'll probably get their gun laws knocked down.
Right.
However, there seems to be this difference when they pass laws in Springfield. Sometimes it doesn't include
Right,
Chicago.
they exempt out Cook
Exactly,
County. Right,
exactly.
yeah.
So how do we change that? How do we become one state and not basically a state within a state?
Well, I mean, the gun laws is a good example because I would also support preemption. So you don't have this patchwork of gun laws
Right.
where I'm legal to own a firearm when I'm driving from my suburban home, but then when I pass through the city limits, now I'm a felon,
Right.
and then when I get out of the city limits, now I'm a law-abiding citizen.
Right.
That's nonsense. So I think you need a lot of leadership from the executive branch, both for right to carry as well as for preemption, so that you have uniformity of law. And the one thing I'll say, too, on gun laws, too, which I always find interesting, and I don't see this argument made enough, the preemptive strike against our rights based on the actions of lawbreakers. So, for example, if my neighbor yells fire in a crowded theater, then he's prosecuted for disturbing the peace,
Right.
but my First Amendment rights are not otherwise constrained.
Right.
But if my neighbor commits a crime with a gun, then my Second Amendment rights are supposed to be constrained. It doesn't make sense, and it treats the Second Amendment different than the other God-given personal liberties enshrined in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, and that's a problem.
Okay, so now you just talked about personal liberty. Let me take that to a more emotional and a more controversial area. Do you think taxpayers should be forced to fund things that they believe are immoral or they morally believe are not right?
No, I don't think so. It kind of comes from a basis, and the discussion about the Bill of Rights also comes from kind of a basis of my belief in natural law, and that the founding principles as enshrined in the Bill of Rights kind of spring from that tradition of natural law.
Can you explain natural law? Because I know what it is, but when I've talked to other people about it, they don't understand it or know what it is. And you're the first candidate to bring it up, so I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about natural law.
Well, I mean, kind of in sum, it's that our rights are derived from our Creator, and they do not reside with the government. So the government is there so long as it has the legitimacy of the people to protect the expression of those rights, but it is not in a position to take those rights away because it was never in a position to grant them in the first place. They're derived from our Creator. That's the fundamental principle.
Okay. And so, this question was kind of skirting around in a more open general about abortion. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you would be opposed to public funding of abortion
Yes.
based on that. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. My last question is, you get a chance to look in the camera. Tell the people a little bit more about who you are, why you believe you're qualified to be governor, and what is your primary responsibility to be governor?